Warhammer Fantasy. It was a game that introduced me into the miniatures wargaming hobby, and I've been playing this game since I was 12 years old, and many birthday and Christmas gifts of my youth went into building the armies that I use on this channel. But it wasn't until I decided to take my love for the game onto YouTube before my hobby became an obsession. Since my channel's inception, the armies in my collection has grown, and I've been purchasing most of the miniatures at the cheapest price possible, giving rise to my channel's name, Commander Cheapskate. As the 40th anniversary of Warhammer approaches on October 14th, with new hints and rumors dropping about the upcoming Warhammer the Old World release, I thought it'd be a fun video to explore and showcase the studio's fantasy collection over the years. While I do not have every faction available in the Warhammer Fantasy setting, I do believe I have enough variety to encapsulate the different rules, narratives, and lore of the world. And with 16 different armies, there's only one question that remains. Is there room for one more? Find out as we showcase all 16 armies in the studio's collection. We will discuss the army's contents, their history, and provide my personal connection to it. And because this will be a deeper dive, I will put timestamps in the description below so you can navigate at your own leisure. And of course, terrain will be involved as well. So without any further ado, let's go and make this video happen. So first of all, let's talk about the Mighty Warriors of Ulthuan, the High Elves. Now for me, this is a very special army because this is the very first army I've ever collected from the 4th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. Pretty much it's made up of all kinds of miniatures from 4th, 5th, 8th, 7th, as well as 8th edition High Elf miniatures. I also have some proxies and some knockoffs from some different companies as well. And the nice thing about this army, of course, is that my father really helped me do a lot of the finalizing work on these miniatures. And because of that, I will always love using these miniatures just for that reason alone. I started painting up this army when I was 12. And of course, I was not a very good painter during that time period, but my father really helped me out in order to do some of the finer detail work on this. And so because of that, this will always be in the studio's collection, and it always has a special place in my heart just for that reason alone. Up next are the Dwarves. Now this army is primarily formed from the Battle of Skull Pass starter box set, as well as a very special gift from my friends Warlord Ace, Sister Serial, Brother Grimm, as well as Lady Domina. The 5 of us actually went on a trip to Boston for 5 days in the fall one year, and my friends and I were just checking out the awesome sights of Boston. My friend's really big on the Red Sox baseball team. It's his favorite team in the world as well. And while we're actually out traveling around looking at Charleston, actually of all places, we actually found a miniature shop, and my friends actually bought me a box set, a battalion box set, actually 2 of them, in order for me to actually use to build up my army. And when combined with the Battle of Skull Pass starter set that I already had already, I was able to actually put this army together and actually field it at 3,000 points as well. And that's the reason why this army is called the Nation of Fallen Holds, and why the major group of dwarf warriors is called Clan Roadsulker. The reason why is because it's the closest I can get to the Norwegian word for Red Sox in Norwegian, and that's also the reason why I have that giant bee painted on the battle standard bearer as well. Like I said, my friends are huge Boston Red Sox fans, and since they bought the starter set for me when I was in Boston visiting it with them, I decided to paint up that army in the Boston Red Sox colors of white and red, and I'll also have the banner up there as well. And so this is a really awesome army. I really love the way that it came out as well. This is the first time I actually used such heavy coats of metallic paints to do most of the paint job for this army. So because of that, just for the fact that my friends got it for me, it holds a very special place in my heart as well. So first of all, we have this niche Legion of Chaos, and oddly enough, this is actually the original Warriors of Chaos army that we actually had in our studio as well. And the reason why is because I really like the bright and bold colors that Sneech had for all the Chaos miniatures, and so that's the reason why I painted up this army originally. Now this one is actually kind of nice because it's made up of a bunch of old 4th edition as well as some 8th edition as well as Age of Sigmar miniatures, and there's a lot of Battle Masters from Milton Bradley in this army as well. I just love the way the bright colors came out, and of course as we got more miniatures in the studio's collection, we decided to actually build up and make individual legions for each of the Chaos Gods. I really like that Chaos Demon back in the background there, because the same one that Lord Tremendous used, which is another YouTuber that inspired me to get into making YouTube videos. So I really like that miniature as well. So yeah, there are some knockoffs as well as some action figures in this army as well to make it up, but all things considered, I am a cheapskate, and I'm just glad I have another army left on the battlefield. Up next, we're looking at the Mighty Human Legions of the Empire. Now, this army is actually pretty interesting as well. It was actually made up of primarily from 2 games. One board game called It's called Battle Masters. That was manufactured by Mills and Bradley. Another game called Lionheart that was also manufactured by the same company as well. In both of those game systems, you had lots of dramatic-looking Renaissance-era miniatures on both sides of those. So because I decided to purchase those up and actually fill up the ranks of most of this army as well. This army is also quite eclectic. It's got a good mixture of 4th, 5th, as well as 6th, 7th, and 8th edition miniatures from the Empire line as well as a lot of my own conversions. As you can see, I have a lot of pikes that I made using floral straw in order to make that, as well as a lot of artillery pieces. But the reason why I love this army so much is because of all the colors that are associated with it. I'm a huge fan of bright, bold colors, as everyone who's ever watched my videos knows. So painting up this Empire army was really, really special. Being able to paint each unit a different set of colors, so that way it stands out against the army, but when combined together you have this kaleidoscope of colors that takes place on the battlefield. It's actually one of my favorite projects that I actually worked on. It's also a really fun army to play on the tabletop as well. The Dark Elves. So this army is actually quite really cool. I did have a couple of 4th edition Dark Elf miniatures back when I was a kid because my friends and I would actually play this game quite a bit. And unfortunately, as we grew older, of course, we stopped playing the game. So my friends usually gave me their leftover miniatures since they knew I liked painting them. So that's originally where the core of this army actually came from. However, what ended up happening though is I was able to score a really awesome set of plastic Dark Elf miniatures. It contained most of the Cold One Knights that you see here, as well as the Spearmen, as well as the Crossbowmen as well as the Cavalry miniatures that were also part of this army too. And I was able to get this at my best haggling work that I've ever done in my life. I was able to talk down the buyer to actually sell it to me for $50 for all those plastic miniatures that you actually see there. And that, to this day, still remains the best purchase I have ever made purchasing things from secondhand. I was never able to get that same amount for that such a low price ever again. Maybe because my reputation, my local gaming store pretty much tipped everybody off. But either way though, it's another really thing I loved about this army is because of that I was able to get those miniatures at such a good price. I also have a lot of Reaper miniatures as well for the monsters in this army, which I absolutely love because those miniatures only cost $5 a pop in my local gaming store. So this army to me is the epitome of the cheapskate that lies within me. So, onto the Lizardmen, my notorious Lizards of Waz army. This is my prankster army, and it's really because it's primarily made up of some Orcs and Goblins, with some Lizardmen involved as well. I always found the dynamic between Orcs and Goblins as well as Lizardmen to be very similar, Orcs being like Saurus Warriors and Goblins being like Skinks. So in my opinion, proxying Saurus Warriors with Orcs and Skinks with Goblins would just seem like a natural fit to me because of the way it kind of worked out as well. As you can see in this army, I also have quite a bit of used secondhand Age of Sigmar Seraphon box sets as well. I believe there were 2 box sets. I think it was Saurus Warriors, and I think the other one was for Skinks. I got this at my local gaming store. This guy who was trying to offload his Age of Sigmar stuff, and unfortunately a lot of his miniatures were actually broken when I actually bought it, which actually worked out in my favor because for me it doesn't matter if it's broken because either I'll convert or I'll repair it in some way so that way I can use it on the tabletop. I'm a cheapskate, what can I say? So I was able to get these things for a song as well. I was able to get both those box sets, I believe, for around $75. So that part was kind of awesome as well. I also had leftover bone splitter miniatures from when our studio started doing Age of Sigmar miniatures, so to use these guys in this Lizardman army just seemed like a perfect fit. One of the things I loved about Lizardmen, of course, is the amazing color palette that Lizardmen have, as well as their Lizardmen armies. They're so bright and colorful with a bunch of teals as well as different bright colors and gold and things. So it looked really amazing, and this looked like a really fun project to create, and I don't regret doing it ever since. So yeah, this is the Lizards of Waz. So the Khorne Legion of Chaos. This army is actually kind of a special army for me as well. And the reason why that is the case is because how this army was pretty much formed. It was pretty much made up of miniatures from Warhammer Age of Sigmar, primarily Blood Reavers, Blood Warriors, as well as Chaos Demons. There's also a few Battle Masters miniatures also set up there as well as another box called Wrath and Ruin, which was a Slaanesh versus Khorne Demon starter box of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Originally, my friends and I were trying to get into Age of Sigmar, however, we just didn't like it very much. It wasn't like anything like Warhammer the Old World, as well as Warhammer Fantasy, so we decided to actually stop playing Warhammer Age of Sigmar and decided to play just solely on Warhammer Fantasy instead. The problem that we ran into, of course, that we had all these Age of Sigmar miniatures, and the question then became, what do we do with them? So what we decided to do is actually use them to create individual Chaos Legions for each of the individual Chaos Gods. And even though the Khorne Legion of Chaos is one of the smallest armies in the studio collection, it actually has a huge punch, causes a lot of damage, and causes all kinds of chaos on the tabletop. So blood for the Blood God. Yes, the Noble Knights of Brettonia. This army was actually formed from 2 box sets of Battlemasters games from Brittle and Bradley as well as from a game called Lionheart that I mentioned earlier as well. I was able to buy those secondhand to make up most of the cavalry. Same thing with the Grail Knights I was able to purchase as well. Now this army is, in my opinion, the most colorful army I actually have in the collection, and the reason why is because I decided to go with the individual paint job for every single mounted knight with their own coat of arms, their own custom colors, to make them look really unique and look very different. If the Empire army is very colorful, I decided for the Brettonians I was just going to let my imagination just fly and just experiment with all different types of different color schemes to see exactly how this army would work out. And it actually comes together quite well, and it looks like something you would see in the medieval battlefields of old, which is really nice as well. I really love the way how all the different colors in this palette kind of mix together, how it kind of forms a unique identity with this army as well. And I just love the way the color schemes really came out for these guys. I can imagine these guys charging across the battlefield directly towards their enemy. And it looks like that Brettonians will actually be getting some love and support from the very first release of Warhammer the Old World, so I'm really super excited to see exactly what kind of new miniatures will become available for this faction when that occurs. So, on to our Forest Spirit Heavy Wood Elf army. This army is actually, the core of these miniatures actually came from a friend of mine who used to play Wood Elves years ago, back when when 5th edition was coming out. Actually, that's where I got the Forest Dragon that you see in the background over there with the Twisters of Twilight, as well as some of the command group members of the Wood Elf archers that I actually have as well. So the thing about this army, of course, this army was actually a army of opportunity. Originally, I actually accumulated quite a bit of Forest Spirit miniatures because I was playing Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I was playing Sylvaneth, so I primarily had a lot of Dryads. I had a lot of these Treekin proxies I was using for Reaper miniatures, as well as Kings of War. I also had some 8th edition Warhammer, Treeman from 8th edition as well that I was using. So because of that, when I stopped playing Warhammer Age of Sigmar, I decided to actually take this army and use it for Warhammer Fantasy. And I didn't really want to buy a whole bunch of other individual Wood Elves to fill out this army. I decided to make this army, the core, be primarily Sylvaneth and just add things to it. I think the only thing I bought for this army, I believe, was purchasing the box of Wood Elf archers. I used 2 of them to proxy the Sisters of Twilight, which I glued on the top of that Forest Dragon miniature, and I believe a couple of Reaper miniatures to do things like branch wraiths and branch nymphs and creatures like that, and then I just use that to primarily make up my army. It's a really colorful army. I really like the way how I use the different colors to play it, and it's also a very quick moving army and very aggressive in close combat. So this makes up the Wood Elf army in our studio's collection. Orcs and Goblins, literally the original OGs of miniatures wargaming. This army was actually the second army that was actually I collected for myself. And the reason why is because it primarily came up from a couple things. First of all, it came from 2 sets of Battlemasters for most of the Orc warriors that you see there, as well as the 4th edition starter set for Warhammer Fantasy, which featured a lot of goblins in that one as well. I also have a couple of 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy miniatures from the Battle of Skull Pass, and that pretty much rounded up the collection for this army. In fact, I had so many Orcs and Goblins left over, I was able to use a lot of them for the Lizardmen army to create the Lizards of Waz as well. So this army has a lot of character. It has a lot of really cool miniatures. The Grom the Paunch miniature, for example, was actually a gift that my friend got me for my birthday years ago when I was like a little kid, and so I've always loved that Grom the Paunch miniature as well. He also gave me that Skarsig and Goblin miniature when he got out of the wargaming hobby later on down the line. So that was actually another reason why I love this army so much. There's a couple editions of Warhammer Fantasy in this army. You'll see a lot of 4th, 5th, 6th, primarily some 7th and some 8th edition miniatures as well. I also proxied in a couple of the big monsters with Reaper miniatures, like using the Bone Skeleton Giant to play the giant in this army. If you notice on that giant, there's a little goblin riding it, holding the head of a High Elf, and I like to pretend that that goblin is using High Elf magic to actually let this giant skeleton thing move around on its own. And then I also have an Arachnarok spider that I use as a proxy using a giant spider from Reaper miniatures, and I put a little hound on the top of it to actually have some little guys on there. And I really love these 4th edition Doom Diver catapults. Those things look absolutely awesome. So yeah, this is a really fun army to paint. Once again, extremely colorful. That's another thing I love about Orcs and Goblins. You can go wild with the color palette, and I really like that Badlands kind of base style that I put on these miniatures as well. Makes the army look really unique and really pop. the Legion of Nurgle. So this is another really awesome army that was actually put together just from happenstance. Actually, got pretty lucky on the way we were able to do so. The Nurgle Army Legion, Legion of Nurgle Army, is actually formed from various editions of Warhammer Fantasy. We have some 4th as well as 5th edition primarily in the form of the Chaos Warriors, and where most of that comes from. However, what a lot of this army actually comes from is from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I believe it's called Blightstorm, I believe it was called. It was a starter set that featured Guardians of Nurgle as well as Sylvaneth, not Sylvaneth, Stormcast Eternals in that set. And so because of this army is actually quite heavy in the use of those demons that came from that starter box set as well. I believe I was able to get a Demons of Nurgle starter box set secondhand as well, and I think that also kind of helped out around the collection. I also have a couple of Blight Kings in here that I've been using as Slave Ogrins and Necromunda that have been infected by Nurgle, as well as some Warcry, not Warcry, it was some Warhammer Underworld miniatures as well. I really love that old 4th edition metal Great Unclean one. That thing is absolutely awesome. It had a lot of character as well. And I also got a giant Reaper miniature in the back for a Plague Demon, just in case one of my guys becomes a Demon Prince. So I really love the color palette on this one. I was able to use this homemade slime effect using polyacrylics made by Minwax, which made it really cool, awesome with all the blood and the pus and the ooze and stuff. So that was something that was really cool to experiment with. And it just looks gross and grody and awesome, and just a really awesome army to paint. And I highly recommend painting up a Nurgle army if you're a novice painter, because if you're making mistakes, no worries. And it just looks like they're rotting. So let's talk about the Ogre Kingdoms. This is actually my only real purpose-built army, using a lot of the original box sets from Games Workshop to actually create this army. It's actually the most official of the armies I actually have. And the reason why that is the case is because I was actually inspired by a White Dwarf article I saw about this guy who took the 2 starter box sets for Ogre Kingdoms and made a 3,000 point army out of it. I thought that was really, really cool how he did that. So because I decided to do that, I bought some Mormfang as well as some Iron Blasters. And like, I think the only real proxy really is the big Mashaf, the Destroyer of Worlds back there, which is from Reaper Miniatures, which is a giant monster. I think that costs like $10, I think, at my local gaming store. So that's what I decided to do. So this army is primarily exactly what it looks like, and so that part was actually kind of nice. I actually did really well gambling one time at a roulette wheel, and I was able to get quite a bit of money from that, and that's what I actually used to create this Ogre Kingdom army with as well. So hooray, lady luck for that one. My friend Mama Khan plays this army to great effect. She usually curb stomps me whenever I play against her. I love the way that this army came out with all the flesh tones as well as all the different bits of color to make it look like they're very motley looking, because they're scavenging their equipment. So I just love this army, and I get glad that we get to see this here on the tabletop. So with that, we're going on to Vampire Counts. Now this one's probably made up of Kings of War for the most part. The rest are pretty much made up of Reaper miniatures, as well as some from Games Workshop. I think I might have got together the bits and pieces of a Soul Blight starter box set years ago from Age of Sigmar, I believe, but I decided to use it for Fantasy instead because that's where my heart lies. And I was able to actually also put together a lot of stuff from a lot of miniatures just from bits of terrain pieces, as well as some secondhand box sets, as well as some monsters from some different gaming companies like Reaper, for example, to create this army. I really like the way that this army came out, especially with all the blood and rot effects as well that we used for the zombies and the ghouls and such. But I really love the ethereal look on a lot of the miniatures that we have in this army. Things like the direwolves, for example, and those fellbats. Those fellbats are actually, I believe, Tyranid gargoyles, I think. This guy at my local game store lost the arms, I guess, to those gargoyles, so he was trying to offload them, so I bought them all for like $5, which is really nice. And so because of that, I was able to get these for a really cheap price, and so I painted them look like fellbats in case I want to include them in the army. I really like the way that the Direwolves came out, as well as the Mortis engine. Same thing with the Black Knights, as well as the Hex Race. I just love that ethereal look that actually got done with this army as well. And this army was actually kind of interesting because I actually bought this army primarily with gambling winnings as well. I actually did really well on a couple of slot machines on a trip that I went to go gambling on, and so I used the proceeds from that to purchase most of the miniatures in this army. I really love the two characters over there, the Lich Master of Heinrich Himmler, as well as Archon the Black. I really love those miniatures a lot, and so because of that, that was really nice to actually put that unit of Graveguard together using that ethereal paint job as well. I'm sorry, not Archon the Black, Krell, there we go, Krell the Undefeated, so that is really cool. So, the Slaanesh Legion of Chaos. This army was actually an opportunity that we actually saw when we saw the Wrath and Ruin box set that released, when it featured Chaos Demons for Age of Sigmar from both Slaanesh and Khorne. I realized I could actually buy that one box set and actually use it to flesh out both of those Chaos Legions with a lot of demon characters. And so that's the reason why this army was actually created. Now, the nice thing about this box set is that you actually see some really cool armies from some 5th as well as some 8th edition miniatures, primarily cavalry miniatures as well. I also have that really cool old school Keeper's Secret, which is kind of neat too, which is kind of nice. I also managed to get some, I believe they're called Possessed. They're from the Chaos Space Marine line. I was able to get a handful of those guys for a really good price, as well as a 40k Chaos Demon, which is also kind of nice too. Most of the cavalry, like the chariots as well as the riders, those guys are from 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, but I do have an old school 5th edition Chaos Pewter miniature from one of the chariots, as well as the champion there running the Fiend of Slaanesh, which is actually kind of nice as well. And I just love the way that this army came out with all the different purples and grays and those pinks and magentas. I thought it was a really cool paint job, and it came out really beautifully as well. And just very vibrant for a Chaos army, which is actually kind of nice too. And you get to see this all the time in our battle reports. And the last army that we have, of course, is the Dogs of War, which is the very last army I was able to put together using primarily leftover bits and bobs from the miniatures that I collected over the years, which is actually kind of nice. I actually didn't have to buy any real new miniatures for the most part. Most of this army was actually just kind of provided for, or just the spare bits and bobs. The only thing I actually had to do, of course, was buy like the Gerlach Black Powder character from Warhammer Underworlds, and I picked that miniature up just because I thought it'd be kind of cool to have that being in general. But for the most part, though, most of the miniatures are actually secondhand and just things I had lying around for the most part, which is what a Dogs of War army is supposed to be anyways. Now, this army was really fun to assemble. I really love the diversity in a Dogs of War army, how you can throw different races together and make a cohesive mercenary fighting force, which is also kind of nice as well. And the fact they use a bunch of leftover miniatures to do it made it even better, in my opinion, as well. I really love the way the color schemes came out on these guys. I just love that bright, bold, colorful look. That's why I love playing human armies in Warhammer Fantasy, just because of that color aspect alone. So that part was really cool, and it was really awesome to create this army as well. So with that being said, that pretty much goes through all the armies in the CEO's collection, and as I promised you, is there a new army on the horizon? So that being said, let's talk about that new possibility. So yes, I am starting a new army, this time going to be Beastmen, and the reason why is because I just love the idea of a Beast of Chaos army. I found that look really interesting as well, and the best reason why I was able to get this is because I was able to get a really good deal on a bunch of secondhand Age of Sigmar Beast of Chaos miniatures. I was able to get everything as you see here on this table for about $100, so I actually got a huge steal on it. I got a bunch of Gore, Best of Gore, Ungore, I believe they're called Minotaurs, as well as some Reaper miniatures for like giants and things. I was able to get those as well. Dragon ogres, it looks like a giant Gorgon type looking thing, some Chaos Spawn, as well as I believe, which is supposed to be Minotaurs, I think. Yeah, little sprue piece there is for Minotaurs. I don't know what that huge skull thing looking thing is, but yeah, I was able to get a bunch of these miniatures for a really good price, and that's the reason why I decided to use it. In fact, as you can see, some of them have already been painted up already because I've been experimenting with different color schemes for this army, and I think I pretty much figured out what color scheme I'm going to go with, which is going to be like a teal kind of aquamarine color for this army's color scheme. Contrasts nicely with brown. And I also got a bunch of trolls I could also throw this army as well, which is going to be really fun to do. And I'm just looking forward to doing this. Warhammer the Old World will be dropping here soon, and like I said, one of the new rules that they have for that starting faction is Beastmen. So I figured, why not play Warhammer the Old World with a new army using new rules and see exactly how it goes. This is also kind of a nostalgia thing for me because for the longest time I played in 4th and 5th edition of Warhammer Fantasy, and I fell out of the hobby for a long time, and the very first game I played back in 8th edition was the Beastmen, and it really got me into the hobby, so it's kind of nice I got to play this again. So there you guys have it. 4 Years of Warhammer is dropping this Saturday. I believe it's the 14th. They'll be releasing some new information about Warhammer the Old World. I cannot wait to see exactly what ends up coming down the horizon for this game. I've been playing Warhammer Fantasy, like I said, since the 4th and 5th editions and all the way until now, and as well as what happened after the end times happened and Warhammer the Old World died. I still kept on going, the hobby going. And I think the reason why this game is coming back now and that setting is coming back is because I think of the community at large. We have a lot of wargamers out there who still play Warhammer Fantasy. They play 9th edition on Warhammer's Army Project, or they played some variant of it with one-page rules, for example, things of that nature. Also, the community out there who are playing Warhammer Total War, you guys had a huge input and a huge effect on making this project happen again. So I'm just really happy that they're finally bringing back Warhammer Fantasy and bringing back the overworld and that setting. I hope at the same time they also bring back Mordheim, which would be really cool if they do that, but, you know, fingers crossed and see what ends up happening. So there you guys have it. This is my homage to the 40-year anniversary of Warhammer Fantasy. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to this channel. I will see you guys later and catch you guys in the next one. Stay classy, make things happen.